You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Gina Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Jason Allen. Well, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories today. We've got a fantastic show for you. Go to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. Any way that you download podcasts, you can listen to it there. I'd like to talk about some sponsors before we get started. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experience. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques, learn from a vast collection of free writing resources, make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one. Join Scribophile today at scribophile.com. For the Words is a unique writing motivator unlike anything I've ever seen. For the Words is an online writing platform which motivates writers of all backgrounds to increase their word count through gamification. Writing can be challenging, especially when you need to consistently produce a high output of words. By injecting a little fun into that routine and using daily rewards to promote a healthy writing habit, For the Words makes it easier to reach those word count goals. We're a community of bloggers, professional authors, college and high school students, research scientists, gamers, and first-time writers from all over the world. Come for the words, stay for the fun. It's forthewords.com. That's the number 4, thewords.com. Writers. The internet is one of the best tools for research and creativity, but it can also be one of the biggest hindrances to productivity, distracting you from doing the seat-in-chair, hand-on-keyboard work. Rescue Time gives you an accurate picture of how you spend your time to help you become more productive every day. Spot inefficiencies in your day and become better at managing your time. Create a goal, like spending less than 1 hour per day on email to help you stay focused. Set an alarm to tell you when you spent more than 2 hours a day on Facebook. Try Rescue Time and use our special discount code for 30% off our Rescue Time premium account by going to rescuetime.com/authorstories. Let us help you rescue your time with Rescue Time. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jason Allen on the show with me today. He has a phenomenal new first novel that is called The East End, and I'll tell you what, this book will have you riveted from page 1 all the way through the end. I was just telling Jason that I've had the book for a couple of weeks now, and it's a fantastic novel. So I'm glad to have you on the show. Jason, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for everything you just said, Hank. Can't even tell you how much I appreciate hearing that.
You're so welcome. It's a tremendous book, so I'm happy to have you and to talk about it. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's such a great first question. I actually had a conversation with at least a few people yesterday at my release party reading where they asked the same thing, and I could trace it back to when I was about 14 or 15. I was in an English class, and I remember we had to write like a very short story, and I just remember loving the idea that I could create a world, that I could, in my imagination, people could come to life and be real people to someone else, and if it was to veer into some other world, like any kind of magical elements. Back then I was a little more interested in that type of story, I guess.
Yeah.
That just seemed so exciting, and almost immediately I decided I wanted to be a writer later in life. So
I
Yeah,
love that. Were you a big reader?
definitely. Yeah, as a really young kid, I remember my mom entered me into one of those library reading contests for kids, and I came in second place, and there was some controversy. The kid that won read like hundreds of books somehow, but I read so many books, and it wasn't just because I wanted to like do well in that contest. I just really did love reading, and she thought that it would be fun to kind of take part in something like that with the library.
That's amazing. You said that your initial desire was that you thought that you would write fantasy or something more fantastical. Did those kinds of stories grab you when you were younger, maybe as a kid and as a teenager? Did those things resonate with you?
I guess that a handful. I wouldn't say that I veered too much into fantasy. It was a little bit more like Rod Serling, the way that he would with the original Twilight Zone episodes. Those kinds of stories where there's a social commentary but placed in kind of a dystopian world, or just something that's not exactly what we experience now. I really, really love those kind of stories, and also certain authors like Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, he did some amazing things that I just felt like, wow, you can do anything with literature.
Exactly. Did you said that your mother signed you up for this reading contest? Did your parents or a teacher, anyone like that, ever recognize that you might have the storytelling gene?
Oh, I think my mother was the one for sure. I mean, that contest, I was probably 10 years old. But it goes way back. The earliest recording of me is when I'm about 3 years old, and I'm trying to tell a story. I think it was at Thanksgiving one year. And the funniest thing is my aunt just could not stop laughing. I was this little kid that kept saying "Once upon a time," and I wanted a story that was about 2 sentences long, but every time I said "Once upon a time," my aunt just cracked up so hard that I just would start over. And so there's a recording like on an old cassette tape that they played back to me a few times at other holidays.
That's amazing. And the performer was born that day. Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Eastern Long Island. So where the East End takes place, it mostly takes place in Southampton. I grew up in Hampton Bays, which is one town away from Southampton. And when we moved there, I was born in a log cabin in Vermont, and we moved to Eastern Long Island when I was about 3. And then we were the kind of working class, poor, almost freak family of the neighborhood because we had pigs and chickens in the backyard. And my mom ended up working at a billionaire's estate in Southampton, which is how I became, I really was interested in the setting where she worked. And I also worked there for one summer much later when I was 19. So the contrast between the way my mom, who was a single mom, had to scrape by, and the way that the family that was a multimillionaire family, the way that they lived, I really felt like where I grew up needed to be the basis for at least one book.
Right. Well, I'm always fascinated by how place affects story and affects the way we see the world. And your new book, The East End, is a pretty great, I think, exposition on that, and how and we're going to talk about this, how your real growing up was affected by the place where you're in, but in more of a in a broader sense, the Hamptons and East Long Island, do those places, do you feel like they still affect the way you see the world, the way you maybe approach writing?
Oh, absolutely. I think if there's one theme I'm most interested in, it would be class, or specifically class divide, the way that it plays out in a place like the Hamptons. And working class people, there's a couple of other themes that I'm really pretty much always interested in, like addiction and recovery, but specifically the way that people can fall into addiction when they are so stressed out from day to day. Just how do they get by? So the place that I grew up and the way in which I grew up, absolutely, I think, factors into everything I write.
Well, as someone who lives in the South, and I believe you live in the South now, don't you? Don't you live around Atlanta? Yeah.
Yep, I'm in Atlanta now.
Okay. So, we have a troubled history with race relations, and I think that goes without saying. But it gets to be more nuanced as time goes on, and I think the class system it becomes, in a lot of ways, the one of the struggles. I won't say the struggle. One of the struggles that we have is against the haves and have-nots that can be of any color. So it gets more and more complicated. And I think that's something that we see all around the country. This is not something just at the Hamptons, even though that divide may be very pronounced as opposed to some of the other parts of the country. But this really is something that I think we can all relate to. I've never spent time in the Hamptons, but I understood the spirit of the story. It resonated deeply with me, even though I've never been there.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah.
That's my hope too, is especially each character's individual struggle. I'm hoping that people feel the same as what you just said about the universal quality of that class issue. I would hope that people are able to empathize with the characters on a bunch of different levels. And maybe it's our own personal experience with struggling economically, but just the way that people feel, I'm hoping that somehow they relate to the way that these characters feel throughout.
Well, and I feel like the disparity in class really feeds into this struggle with addiction that you mentioned earlier, and it really is becoming more widespread and rampant, it seems like.
Oh, for sure. And the way that I grew up, Eastern Long Island is so extreme in so many ways. We lived on a very long island. I mean, it's aptly named. But you go about 2 hours east of New York City to get to the tiny house that I grew up in. And my friends that I grew up with mostly were from broken homes. We were kind of the misfits, the creative types, but also really self-destructive. I mean, from season to season, during the summer, millions of people would flow out to Eastern Long Island to vacation, and that's when we had to work the most. And then in the winter, it was more of a cabin fever effect. So it became a 365-day-a-year kind of attempt to escape through drugs and alcohol. So some of my friends, are, I think, probably still struggling if I've lost touch with them a long time ago. I actually myself got sober many years ago, and it was one of the best things I've ever done. But
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And I mentioned that mainly because I'm hoping that if somebody hears this, they might, think, well, this is maybe a conversation I can have with someone either about themselves or about, someone that they care about.
Sure. So when did you leave the Hamptons and kind of strike out away from that initial experience?
Well, it was actually 2004 was the last time that I lived there at all. I moved for a long time, and going back from my undergrad degree in my late 20s is when I started as a freshman at Portland State. But up until that point, I went back and forth to Long Island because you could actually make more money in the summer season there than some other places, but you had to sacrifice comfort in terms of living situations. So I kind of felt like it just wasn't worth it anymore. I used to share a house with, say, like 6 or 7 guys and a couple of dogs over a summer, and we would sleep on couches or in corners, and it really was a rough way to try and save a little bit of money.
And you don't get to have much of a summer yourself, do you?
None. I mean, I work on average 60 to 70 hours in the summers. So, yeah, I cleaned pools for the rich people, or I worked for carpenters and landscapers and all sorts of different, just mostly hard labor, blue collar kind of jobs.
Wow. I've talked to some friends who have grown up in New Jersey and places close to New York City, and we've talked a little bit about the fact that it's kind of weird growing up close to there, but not there, in that not far from your little existence is this magical place where millions of people live and crazy stuff goes on 24 hours a day, but you're separated from that just a little bit. Do you have that effect in the Hamptons as well?
I would say so. It's odd because my hometown was at least a 2-hour drive from New York City, but I felt like we had some of the intensity of New York City that trickled all the way to the tip of Long Island, and things like the fact that there's just everything and anything in New York City, like in terms of like drugs, even like they all flowed to Eastern Long Island as well. So when people work extreme hours the way that we all did in the summer, I think that it was surprising if someone didn't fall into at least like problematic substance abuse at a certain point.
Well, at some point you decided that you wanted to pursue writing, you got your MFA. What was that decision like, and what was the path that has taken you now to Atlanta, where you teach writing and you've got the new book out?
Well, it's been a really strange, long journey.
Those are the best.
Yeah, yep. I have plenty to write about because of it too, which I'm grateful for. So I did my MFA out in Portland, outside of Portland at Pacific University. And then I did my PhD in upstate New York. And when I finished the PhD, I moved to Atlanta and got a job at Clayton State University, which is where I've been for the past 2 years, which has been great. The people I work with are so nice. And most of my students, they're from more rural parts of Georgia. And I really am rooting for all these kids. So it's been a really good experience to transition into being a full-time teacher at a university. But it really was a long road just to publish this first novel. In order to get an agent, even, it took me 5 or 6 years of querying, and I had a different novel at first, and then I had a memoir manuscript, and I had lots of interest, but never that offer. And so with this book, when I signed with my agent, it was really a fast track to a lot of things changing. Like, we sold the book 2 or 3 months after I signed with my agent, and then there was a 14-month countdown from there until it was released yesterday.
Wow. Before we talk about the book specifically, tell me about A Meditation on Fire.
Okay. Yeah, my first full-length poetry collection that came out in 2016. That's a really personal collection of poems. I would say if somebody was curious about getting to know me, then that poetry collection, it's all there. Like, people would know a lot about like my family history, especially a really extremely strained relationship with my father. My parents got divorced when I was a kid, and he worked doing hard labor, sanding hardwood floors, and he was an alcoholic as well. Didn't drink for 20 years, and then decided to start again, and then he actually disappeared and became homeless. And then we found out years later that he actually had died, but we didn't know for about 2 years until someone finally informed us. So there's a lot of really heavy family stuff, a lot of threads about addiction and recovery, but also a lot of poems that just sort of, are standalone. They tap into a feeling that I really love about poetry, that you can write something and get something out like a lightning strike in a way that you can't with a novel or a memoir.
Right. That was a book of poetry. You're working on a memoir. You mentioned earlier that you'd been working on that, and I think is the memoir going to be published anytime soon?
Well, I would like to say yes for sure. I'm feeling good about it. It's actually connected to what I just mentioned about the poetry book. It's now titled Sons of the Father, which is a play off Sins of the Father, and it really connects me with my brother, and kind of the brother relationship that we developed when we were so disconnected from our father. In a way, we had to figure out life without that male role model, or to realize that we didn't want to be like that role model that we had. So I really feel like it's going to be a book that I'm going to put out to the world and hope that someone connects with, and there's some healing. I think that memoir is just amazing, where when I read Nick Flynn's memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, I just was blown away by some of the parallels, but also just I thought that he really like bared himself to the readers, and there's something about that that's just so cathartic for the person reading it. And I was lucky enough to meet Nick at AWP a couple times, and he is just such a great guy too. So that
Nice.
was me.
That's incredible. Well, I ask you about that because with A Meditation on Fire being a collection of poems that are very soul-bearing for you, and like you said, they're very autobiographical, and if people want to learn about you and understand you, that would be a good place to do it. So we've got that. Then we've got the memoir that you're working on. Those are very specific things that are very specific for you. But then we've got the novel, The East End, which is definitely informed by you. But what does writing the novel, even being so close to who you are and your experiences, what does writing the novel afford you as a writer that memoir and poetry cannot?
Well, I think that with all the writing I've done in all the different genres, fiction will always be my main focus and my favorite because you can really do anything with fiction. Like going back to some of my earliest influences, like when I mentioned Kurt Vonnegut, I mean, I'm not going like to that other world like he does, but the characters in the novel are purely fictional, but I would say a lot of the times I realize after the fact that they're kind of an amalgam of lots of people I've known, or it's some of my own personal experience that I'm able to sort of explore through other people. Like the Gina character, who's the mother of the teenager who breaks into mansions on Long Island for fun. Gina's experience with hitting bottom with alcohol and pills, I think, is probably an amalgam of about 100 people that I've known well. And I just really wanted people to connect with her struggle and to see that she's doing the best that she can, even if she's really not doing very well. Yeah. But fiction is it's such a vast landscape where I can take things that I've known and just really explore them and see what happens. So I just love it.
So, Jason, when you start on a story, and we can use the East End as an example, but when you're starting on a new project, how does the story usually come to you? Is it a character? Is it a situation? Is it a headline? What is that? What's the birthing process for that usually like for you?
Well, I can say with the East End and also my current novel that I'm hoping to finish over the summer, both began with an image, and it's just an image that not only would not I just couldn't let go of it. It just developed more and more day by day without me intending to think about it. And so in a way, it was like a scene that played out like a movie scene. And in the East End, it's that sequence when there's a chase where it's the three people running across the lawn with the moon shining down and the lake over there with the moon kind of off the lake water. Without giving away too much of the book, I just felt like the intensity of that scene and the chase and the imagery, like I just felt like was with me for maybe a month before I ever wrote it down. And I wrote down just kind of a sketch of the scene and then wrote a short part that was, I thought Corey might be the point of view character all the way through. He's the teenager. But I found that it was much more interesting if I followed multiple points of view. So Corey, his mother Gina, and the billionaire Leo. And then I found later that Angelique, who's Corey's love interest, would also maybe be a point of view character. It just seemed to be a story that when people see the same sequence from different angles and have partial information, that it just became way more fun and interesting.
When you started unraveling that and kind of letting that scene kind of run away and see what was going to become of it, did all of the characters come together pretty quickly? Like, at what point did you realize that this was going to be a multi-perspective story?
I would say fairly early on. I didn't realize, though, that the billionaire character would be an almost equal point of view with Corey and Gina. he at first I thought would maybe just make an appearance where it was going to be this really dark, foreboding kind of scene where, since you've read the book, it's like when he's kind of plodding on by himself into the woods. I had this idea of maybe like a Cormac McCarthy sequence almost, like from Blood Meridian, where Leo is just dragging something, and I at first thought I would just refer to him as, say, like the CEO, and not even give him a name. And it's so interesting to look like years back now to those beginning thoughts, because the book just evolved so much over time. And some of that I have to credit my agent with. We went through a revision process for about a month before we sent it out to publishers. And she was amazing to kind of like think through the sequencing and how much to balance each perspective. And she's just amazing. Her name's Sarah Bedingfield, and she actually flew down from New York yesterday to Atlanta for my release party reading, which it meant so much to me that she did that.
That is awesome. Going through that revision process with her, as a teacher who is teaching new writers or writers that want to continue to hone and build their craft, you understand all of that, all of the process from a teacher's perspective. When teacher has to become student again, and go through this process of taking your baby and laying it bare, was that a difficult process that once you've told this story and now you have to hand it over to other people, to have a critical eye at it, and does that ever get easier?
Oh, I think so. It depends on who you're working with, probably. With Sarah, it was so organic, and it really felt like she and I have such a like-minded take on even just other books that we love, like why we love those books and what we felt like the goal was for the East End. A lot of it really just had to do with maybe a certain character could be featured a little bit more. So she would suggest things like that, like in between these two chapters, maybe we should have another Leo chapter, or it really wasn't anything that was difficult to accept. There weren't many points where she was like, I really think that you need to cut this, even though it's one like To Kill Your Darlings kind of thing. But she's brilliant, though. She was an editor before she was an agent, and I just felt like I trusted her completely, and it was easy to work with her. Years ago, though, in workshops, like in grad school, like it can be a little more difficult when you have so many voices chiming in.
Well, I think that's the important thing, isn't it? That you have someone who understands the story and understands you, and can be on the same page. There's nothing worse than taking advice or criticism from someone who doesn't like your genre. That would be the worst, or just doesn't get the soul of the story. That's really a gift when people understand it together.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I feel so lucky that I get to work with the people I work with. My editor, Laura Brown, is amazing too. She's been putting like so much extra time in recently, because with the book release, she pitched some ideas for essays, and I wrote 3 essays in about a month's time that she went back and forth with me on edits before she sent out, and it's been really amazing. Like Salon accepted one, and it was published just a few days ago, and there's a couple others that I feel like we're going to hear really soon that they're going to be accepted. And between Sarah, my agent, and Laura, my editor, I just feel like, wow, I never imagined having these types of amazing people to work with.
It's fantastic. One thing that I really love about the book, and you take us into some interesting territory, and we begin with this cultural divide, this class divide that we've talked about. But those lines begin to blur a little bit when people have to band together to hide secrets together. When did this aspect of the story come in, and was that an exciting part when you started realizing that, okay, the great equalizer here is fear, and everybody being all in this together with secrets. Tell us a little bit about the evolution, that part of the evolution of the story, please.
Well, I love that you just put it like that the great equalizer is fear. That's really, like, I never really thought about it in exactly that term, but I love that. Yeah, the billionaire character, Leo Sheffield, he was by far the biggest challenge in the writing because I realized that I needed to care about him a lot for the readers to care about him and to not just paint him as like a two-dimensional, ultra-rich villain, that would be easy to hate. And so, like, his conflict, the fact that he's been so just traumatized from early on so that he had to deny who he really was, made me care about him a lot more than I realized. Even as I was writing some parts, I just realized over time that I cared about him almost as much as I did about the working class characters. And when they do come together because of this shared fear and they all have something at stake, that just became so interesting to me. It's like, you think that this is going to happen, but then it plays out a different way. And I just love, as a writer, when I'm surprised as I'm writing. My hope is the reader would be too then.
Yeah, and when you kind of pull the rug out from under us by making us start to care about this person that we've immediately written off as a villain. And that's brilliant, too. It really keeps the stakes high throughout the story.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah. The book is out everywhere now, The East End. This is an amazing book, Jason. I've thoroughly loved reading it. I'm sending everybody to get a copy of it. What are you working on now?
Well, my novel in progress, the working title is Down on Lovejoy. I used to live in Portland, and there was a street in Portland called Lovejoy, which is about a block from where I used to live. And it's right on the industrial edge of northwest Portland. Back in 2008, like when we basically fell into the housing crisis and the economic collapse, it also happened to be the harshest winter in Portland for a really long time. So we had a couple of feet of snow. And I just loved the idea of having an extreme cold winter with down and outer characters that are really struggling to get through the day. And there's a lot at stake because there's a couple of kids in the mix. And so that's what I'm going to be finishing, I hope, this summer. And then I'll be going back to the memoir, I think.
Nice. Well, we look forward to seeing what comes of the second novel and the memoir and everything coming up. Jason, if people are just learning about you and want to get plugged in with all that you do and follow along as you're on this journey, is there a place they can connect with you online?
Oh, yeah. JasonAllenAuthor.com is my author website. And I'm also on Facebook, Twitter. I just started on Instagram, so people can find me probably with the hashtag for the East End. They might be able to find me as well.
Fantastic. We'll link it all in the show notes, and we'll send everybody to see you. Congratulations on the book launch, Jason, and we're going to send everybody to see you.
Thanks so much, Hank. This was great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason and Joey took their food trays outside and sat high above the parking lot on the secluded stairwell that had become their lunchtime hangout, picking at their Thanksgiving specials and swapping updates. They were almost finished eating before Jason managed to screw up the courage to say what he needed to. "I want to apologize." Joey looked puzzled. "What the hell for?" "Because your coma was my fault." "Yours? The horseman beamed me. You didn't." "Hey, want to see something cool? Look what I found on my phone." Joey produced the device, hit a few buttons, and swiped his finger. An orange circle hung in a field of black, overexposed, something that had been moving fast when the flash caught it. "I was trying to get his picture, right? Like an idiot? Well, I didn't get him, but that is the pumpkin he threw at me." Jason stared at the blurry orange shape for a long time. "Cool. Cool? Can you imagine if we actually got a picture of the Headless Horseman? We'd be famous by now." He pocketed the phone. "Hey, do you want the rest of this turkey? It looks like bologna." "Tastes like bologna, too." He speared the slice anyway. Look, this is going to sound weird, but I think I made you a target. What do you mean? I made you a target by telling you about my gift. It's some sort of magical rule. If we reveal ourselves to a normal person, whoever we tell becomes a target for ghosts. And usually, they die. And you told me anyway? No, I'd already told you. There was no way to untell you. Don't be mad. It all worked out, right? Right? Joey's expression had darkened. Give me a second here. And there's a bright side. What bright side? Now you'll have a gift too. Me? That's what your coma was. Some kind of transition. You got targeted, but you survived. You'll be a founder now, like Ichabod. You'll pass your gift to your kids like he passed his to me. Joey looked worried. What kind of gift will I get? People get gifts that complement their natural abilities. It could be anything. Anything? So, I could read minds? I guess. Turn purple and levitate? Probably not. Something that expresses the essential you. Then I'll have an actor's gift. What's an actor's gift? Jason shrugged. Super narcissism? Shut up. So you're not mad? Joey was shaking with excitement. Mad? This is the coolest thing ever! We'll be like the dynamic duo, fighting supernatural foes up and down the eastern seaboard. Jason laughed, feeling epic relief. I thought you'd be pissed. Nah. What's a little coma between friends? He took a bite out of a Nutter Butter, grinning madly. I'm going to be a superhero. But you can't tell anyone. Why not? Weren't you listening? Everyone we tell dies. You can't talk about your gift to anybody. But if they were targeted and lived, we could have our own X-Men. Yeah, or all your friends could die. Do you want to risk that? No, I guess not. But I don't do closets very well, you know? I came out at conception. Promise to keep it to yourself. Yeah. Joey shifted sideways and walked his sneakers up the brick. So, the essential me. Ooh, I know what gift I'll get. I'll get a singer's gift. What's a singer's gift? Jason shrugged. Superhuman drug tolerance? Shut up!